Okay, you want to start letting people in, Amy? Hello, everybody. We have a good crowd here. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining. I recognize James and Jen and Andrew, Ramsey. Amy, how's the audio? Okay? Okay, great. Thanks. Doug Johnson, don't recognize you, but hi, love your shirt. What's your shirt say? Okay. Are you actually in San Francisco? No. Okay. Hey, Andrew. Well, thank you all for joining. We're going to get started here timely. And just a couple housekeeping items. One is that we're recording this, and the recording will be available later on for you to share with a friend, a fellow investor, or if you want to watch parts of it over again and fast forward. Because some of the things we'll go through pretty quickly, and a lot of detail, and certainly will be available for personal phone calls later on for more, go into, drill down into some of the things we talked about today. But should be a lot of fun. We're going to start off high level about investing in real estate in New Hampshire, and then we'll give you plenty of time for questions as well. If you'd like to answer questions throughout, please just write them in the chat room. And Porcupine Amy, who works for Porcupine Real Estate, she's our marketing guru, and now she's the Zoom master. She'll be collecting those comments and answering questions or asking questions for us to crowdsource throughout the call. And let's see. As by way of introduction, my name is Mark Warden. I'm the broker and owner of Porcupine Real Estate, a small but mighty libertarian real estate practice in New Hampshire. And I've been in the real estate business for 20 years, including over 10 years here in New Hampshire. I've owned about 15 properties over the years, started my investing career in Long Beach, California. I worked with a couple partners. We bought 3 single-family houses back then. We sold them all after 7 or 8 years. And then many years later, I invested in Las Vegas real estate market. I sold real estate for new home developers in Vegas and owned 5 houses there, including 3 single-family rental properties. Then fast forward, New Hampshire. I've been here about 10 years, and I've owned a 7-unit apartment building in Milton, New Hampshire that I had managed by a professional property manager. And I've owned 3 single-family houses as investment properties, and then lived in my own. I've since then sold off all but 1 single-family property, and we can get into that later on if you want to know why. But anyway, that's my experience. So I've seen it from both the multifamily aspect and from the single-family investment. And personally, I like single families, but the numbers are much better in multifamilies. So we're going to get into some of that today, and you're going to hear from a couple of their panelists. You'll see them on the camera there. One's Frank Yafaldano. He's in New York City. The other is Constance Spencer, who also works for Porcupine Real Estate. She's one of our agents and also an experienced real estate investor. And as an agent, she works with a lot of investors as well. So between Constance and myself, we've looked at thousands of houses, hundreds of multifamily properties, and we come to bear with that experience when working with our clients. What I'm doing right now is just start a little slideshow and go over some of these topics, give you a feel for kind of the main things we like to look at when thinking about investing in real estate. Now, I realize some of you already have a rental property under your experience. But for first timers, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls. It's not all great rainbows and candy. You know, there are a lot of problems with being a property owner, and we don't want to blow smoke up your skirt. We're going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's start on the slideshow. Hopefully you can see that all right. Let me get to a different one. Okay. Start slideshow, bear with me. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. Now we're at the first slide. This should do it. Sorry, guys. Even though we practiced this earlier, there we go. Okay, one of the things we look at in real estate, some people want to buy for, hey, Amy, can you unmute yourself and make sure that you can see the screen okay? The slide okay? Okay. Some people invest for cash flow. And when you read a lot of the investment gurus, they'll talk about investing for cash flow. Now, a lot of us have seen tremendous appreciation over the last 5 years. So we like to think we're investing for appreciation also. But if you're going to be a long-term holder, you know, you really need to think more about just making sure that cash flow works for you. That's because markets come and go, prices rise and fall. I think over time, real estate investment prices are always going to go up. But, you know, we saw prices drop from 2006 down to 2011 precipitously. During that last depression, you know, real estate really caved. And if you were counting on being able to flip a house, buy high, or buy low and sell high, you bought in 06, 07, 08, 09, you know, you were in for a hard reality. We saw the prices drop to the bottom, 2010, 2011, but it took all the way until 2015, 2016 to get back to the same price point that we saw in 2006. So really, when you're going to invest some of your hard-earned money, think about cash flow. Is now a good time to invest? We'll see. It really depends on the market. If we're talking about New Hampshire, you know, I'm still bullish on New Hampshire long term. I think we have a couple more good years of increasing values and increasing rents, and then it may level off. Once interest rates start creeping back up to where they really should be, then that's going to have a chilling effect on real estate values because we'll see fewer investors, fewer buyers for real estate. But I think rents will always be good because there haven't been that much new building in New Hampshire. A couple of other points here on the slide you're looking at. We talk about leverage. That's the beauty of real estate, is you can buy with as little as 3.5% down using FHA financing. And that really shoots your ROI or return on investment numbers really high. Your pure investors, like Frank, who's on our call tonight, you're typically looking at 20 or 25% down, which still may be better returns than you're making in other markets. But it's not the same as the leverage you're going to see as an owner-occupied first-time investor with 3.5% down using FHA financing. Appreciation, we talked about a bit. Tax advantages are huge because with rental real estate, particularly on investment property, you get to depreciate over many years. You get depreciation on the asset for tax purposes. And the appreciation lowers the effective income. So you're paying rent, you're paying federal income taxes on your net income after depreciation. Even though your cash flow is higher, what you're showing the books includes depreciation, okay? So that's the beauty of owning rental real estate. And there are books and seminars and podcasts on this, and we can talk about it more in depth, and you should really ask your CPA or your tax professional about that. And we'll go into that a little bit more later in the call. Okay, pitfalls. Here's some of the scary stuff. Well, basically just pitfalls are property management is a hassle. Tenants can be a real pain in the behind. Leaky faucets, leaky roofs, people tripping and falling on your property and suing you, people not paying the rent. You know, it's hard to evict tenants. New Hampshire is one of the better states compared to the more liberal states, but still it can take 45, 60 days to kick somebody out and evict them. You know, you're missing out on rent, and you have to deal with all the BS and legal costs in many cases. So that's a big pitfall. And maybe when Constance and Frank come on in a bit, they'll tell you some of their horror stories. I tell you, one of my big horror stories was in this. Hi, Fabian. When I have a 7-unit building in Milton that I recently sold using, actually I gave a note, what's called seller financing to the buyer. And it's on septic system. And after I'd owned the building for 3 years, the septic system backed up into one of the units. So we had a big mess, had to clean it up. And I had to replace the leach field and the septic tank, and that cost $15,000. So again, a lot of pitfalls. Okay. We always recommend using a real estate agent when buying your property. Certainly this sounds self-serving, because that's what I do. I work as a buyer's agent. But if you're new to the business, definitely use a real estate agent, whether it's me, Constance, or somebody in your market. Some of you guys are out of state. You may want to buy in the Midwest or places where they have cheaper, less expensive real estate. Definitely you want to use an experienced real estate agent. Ideally somebody who has owned his own property, has had tenants, has invested himself or herself, because they know the things to look for. Also, they're going to give you a market analysis. They're going to know the different neighborhoods. They're going to help with negotiations. And they're going to have a team of experts. They're going to have the title company, the lenders, the home inspectors, the septic inspectors, the bankers to work with. So all that's very, very important. And you want somebody who's going to represent your best interests, not the interests of the seller or the bank. I'm sorry, well, the interests of the seller. Right? Next slide. Okay. We just had somebody else come in the waiting room. We're going to invite Frank Iafaldano to share some of his experience. And I think Amy can unmute Frank. And Frank, tell us where you are, why you chose New Hampshire, and kind of why you chose the buildings you did in Concord.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay now? Am I unmuted?
I hear you.
All right, excellent. So I actually met Mark in 2013 for the Free State Project, and I started investing in 2016. So I have properties I purchased in 2016, 2017, 2019, and now I'm looking for another property this year. You know, I'm generally a buy and hold investor. So, you know, that's basically, I'm looking for the cash flow as opposed to appreciation. What else did you want me to talk about, Mark, as far as the properties themselves or the income?
Yeah, give us sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tell us about your first building and what kind of repairs were there. And again, because you're in the construction business, you didn't care if it was a fixer-upper. So give us an idea of what you were looking for in your first and second building.
Yeah, so with the first building, it didn't need too many repairs. I did a little roofing work, some repairs to the inside. All the buildings I purchased were already occupied. So that's basically what I'm looking for, fully occupied buildings. As far as like tenant turnover, I don't really have much tenant turnover at all. The tenants have stayed in my apartment for several years. And even the building that I purchased in 2016, I still have 3 of the 4 tenants in that particular building. You know, the main thing I would say is to make sure you have proper reserves. With the second building I purchased, the roof on the building, I knew that was going to have to be addressed in a few years. And what ended up happening was, after the purchase, the insurance company sent an inspector over and they sent me a notice and were like, look, you know, we need to get the roof replaced. So instead of having a couple of years to build up some reserves, I had to pay that out of pocket. So that was definitely, you know, that was a surprise. But I did have the reserves for it. It wasn't a big deal, and the buildings have been cash flowing well. So I really can't complain.
Hey, Frank, regarding cap rates, we may get into this a little bit more, but real estate investors always look at something called a cap rate or a capitalization rate, which basically means if you paid cash for the building and the net income, based on the net income, what the return on investment would be. So for example, you buy a building for $200,000 and the net income per year is $20,000. That's a 10 cap rate.
That's right.
We don't see those anymore. In New Hampshire, now they're down to 7s and 8s. But where you live, aren't the cap rates a lot lower?
Yeah, the cap rates in New York City are, I would say, 1% at best. I think what most people are doing in New York City is they're purchasing for the depreciation and as an equity play, because I think what they're looking to do here is hang on to the buildings for a couple of years and then turn it to somebody at a higher price, which, again, it depends what year you bought. If you purchased in 2008 up to like 2013, now you made big money. But anybody who's buying now, I see the properties in New York City, the days on market are getting longer, and there are price reductions. So those people who were just trying to buy as an equity play, I see them losing money in the next year. Whereas in New Hampshire, my properties can go up and down. I'm not interested in selling, so that doesn't affect me as much. I'm in it for the cash flow.
And Frank, before we move over to Constance, tell us how using a property management company works for you. What do they charge? What do they do for you? And why did you want to have a property management company here in New Hampshire for your building?
Right. So since I'm in New York City, I'm 4 hours away. There's no way I could ideally manage the property. In New York City, I also operate a construction company here. So that's really the properties needed to be passive investment. And so I have the property manager. They pretty much handle everything, but I'm not going to say it's a passive investment. I still get emails from them about tenants' concerns, and you know, some people are looking to have a dog, or they need repairs done. If there's any repairs, they always inquire about it first with me, and then we can discuss it and make a decision. So, but really they handle all the minor stuff. I will say when I had the roofing done or any major repairs, I just handle it myself because I feel like it's more in my wheelhouse to deal with repairs. So I'll call around to different contractors, get a feel for them, and then I'll have the property management company speak to them to schedule a repair date.
Okay, wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I think there are a couple of questions. Remember, folks, if you want to ask questions of Frank or any of the other speakers, write them in the chat room or chat box.
In the chat here.
And then Amy,
Okay.
let's Amy. Amy will tell us some of the questions she sees there to share with us. Go ahead, Amy.
Why don't we let Constance introduce herself first?
Okay. Constance, tell us where you are. Tell us about your first building and why you chose Manchester, and tell us about being an owner-occupied investor.
Yeah, it says on there I'm a newer investor, which is somewhat true, as in I'm back in it. I actually rented my first single-family home when I moved to Alaska. So I've been a landlord since my 20s and off and on. And then in Alaska, I bought a fourplex when I had only 2 kids. I now have 4. And that was great. I was able to have the other 3 units pay for the mortgage and utilities when I was a young mom. So working was more optional. And so when I became a single mom of 4 kids in Manchester, which I also moved here for the Free State project from Alaska. So a little bit of a move. As a single mom, I knew that I wanted to have the time to be with my kids. And so if I could purchase a building that allowed me to have one of the units to live in while the other 2 or 3 paid my mortgage, then I would have more free time to work on my real estate career, quit my other job, which I did, and have more flexibility with my schedule. So that's what I did. I chose Manchester because, well, it's more for where I want to live with my kids. They have great schools here that they attend, and it's very central to be a realtor with Porcupine Real Estate because we cover a lot of the state. So being in Manchester is very helpful. Let's see, other questions. So the New Hampshire is also very good for landlords as compared to the surrounding states. So I'm not licensed in any other state, and I would not consider purchasing even if the numbers looked good in other states, because I haven't had any court issues myself, even though I had bad tenants when I purchased my building that I had to have move out. I was able to get them to move without taking them to court. However, clients of mine had to delay a closing because of evictions. And so it delayed it by about 30 days, but the seller was able to get them out, which is definitely different than I hear from other states.
Can you speak to the city of Manchester for owning a property? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? And what is a COC?
Okay, so the only thing that I dislike about it probably is the COC, and I've been pretty fortunate that I bought my building with one in place that actually expires this month. So I have not been through the inspection, but I've worked with other buyers who are in the process of the inspection, and I've heard some stories of things. For instance, the second building that I just sort of kind of purchased, as in my partner purchased it, as in live-in partner, and I'll be moving to soon. There was an exterior door on the first floor unit that is now plywooded over, just because one of the COC inspector said it needed to go. And then seller renewed the COC just in June and had no issues at all with the building. So it's really just a matter of the inspector and what they spot and what they want, decide. From what I understand, working with other buyers here in the city. And there's definitely neighborhoods that are better and worse in Manchester. So something that you should look into before you purchase. Not just neighborhoods, but also like the very next building over. Like if you want to make sure you're purchasing a place that, doesn't have a lot of activity with law enforcement right next door, because you're not going to be able to keep the tenants. But the vacancy rate being so low in Manchester, it's been it's usually pretty easy to fill the units. As a matter of fact, I posted that I was under contract for another multifamily, and I had 3 different people message me asking if I was going to have vacancies before I even closed on the new one. So,
Hey, Constance?
yeah.
Let's just to fill in, I think there was a question in the chat box about a COC. We'll let the listeners know the COC is Certificate of Compliance, and that's required in Manchester for all rental properties. The city goes through, a city inspector goes through every 3 years to make sure there are no health and safety issues in the rental property. Now, Rochester has something similar with the inspections, and Manchester has it. But those are the only 2 cities I know about in New Hampshire. Frank's buildings in Concord don't require that. So anyway, that's what Constance was talking about, the COC. It's really a low threshold of compliance. And if you're a responsible, conscientious landlord, you would do those things anyway. Things like smoke detectors, the heat works, the door's locked, the windows can open.
One of my units is actually rented with Section 8, so it's a much more vigorous inspection than the COC. For me, I just don't like to disturb the tenants and have them come in and inspect my property. I will.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Constance, for sharing. Why don't we open up to
Also want me to mention how I purchased mine. You probably also want me to mention how I purchased mine, because I used the FHA loan that Mark mentioned, and I had the seller. It was 2018. I had to make 3 or 4 offers before I got one accepted, where the seller would pay closing costs. But as I mentioned, I was a single working mom, so saving up for the closing costs and the reserves took me a couple years. Plus, I was a part-time worker, so I had to have 2 years of work experience before they would even consider giving me a mortgage. But I did find a seller because of the terrible tenants in the building when I bought it that I was willing to deal with, that accepted my offer and paid all my closing costs. And then the bonus of being a realtor is I got commission. So I actually left closing with more money than I took in. So that's something I encourage a lot of buyers when they're like, oh, I think I want to be a real estate investor in the future, but first I want to buy a single family home. I'm always like, please talk to your lender, make sure that's the order you want to do that, because you can only use the FHA loan for the 3.5% down for up to 4 units for the first, if you're not already a homeowner, from what I understand talking to lenders.
Great. Thank you very much. Amy said there are a few questions in the chat box. Because some people are listening and can't see the chat box, and this will be recorded, they won't be able to see it, so we want to ask them publicly. Go ahead, Amy.
One of the questions was, what has been your experience with single-family homes?
Okay, I guess I'll answer that because of the group here, I've really mostly done single-family houses. I have 2 in Manchester and 1 in Guilford, New Hampshire, and what I like about single families is typically they hold their values fairly well over time, and you can get pretty good quality tenants. You know, there's so many apartments in New Hampshire, in Concord, Manchester, Nashua, Rochester, Dover, that people are really hungry for a house, a detached house with a yard. So you can get higher rents. Obviously, you can also get typically a better quality tenant because you have more to choose from, and the rents are going to be higher. The overall ratio or return is going to be lower than you get with units, but that's been my experience, is that the tenants are higher quality. They'll take care of the house themselves.
Next question is, how and why did you choose New Hampshire to invest in?
I think that one was specifically for Frank.
Sure, I can answer to that. Well, if we're mentioning the Free State project, that was the whole reason why I came to New Hampshire in the first place. And I think one of the best things about owning real estate in New Hampshire is everything's local. The cash that comes in is very decent, and I can use that to pay property managers that, you know, are liberty oriented, any kind of charities, or basically any kind of business that I want to deal with. Since the money is coming into my pocket every month, I can spend it as I see fit. Whereas with stocks, number one, I'm not as familiar with stocks, but you're basically giving that money to somebody who's on Wall Street. They're going to take their money, their fees, do what they see fit with that, and then, you know, hopefully you're going to get a return. I'm basically getting money every month in my bank account, and then I can do with it as I please, save up, buy another property. So those are definitely the advantages. But I've been looking all over for many years for a place to invest. When I found the Free State Project in New Hampshire, I knew that was a place I wanted to be, and that's when I started purchasing properties.
I can speak a little bit to different states. One of the things about New Hampshire is the property taxes are relatively high compared to other jurisdictions. And one of our viewers here, Mr. Doug, is down in Alabama, where the property tax is a lot lower, property values a lot lower. So somebody who's just starting out, you know, may look at the Midwest, Alabama, South for more affordable options, and maybe even a little bit better cap rates. But for Frank and Constance and myself, we're emotionally invested in New Hampshire as well as economically invested. So that's why we chose places here. We know a lot of people in the community. It helps us find tenants, helps us find property managers, helps us find people who can do the repairs and paint and work on the house and keep it within our community. So we'll, in some cases, accept a lower cap rate, a lower ROI to keep it in New Hampshire. But it is a valid question, why New Hampshire? And I think, you know, you should always consider other states as well.
I would say that also the Midwest, but we have similar prices and returns if you look at like Berlin than you can get in the Midwest. So there are affordable pockets in New Hampshire to invest in.
Yeah, I just to add really quickly to that, you know, about choosing the states. My father owns 4 units in New York City. You know, he's had a non-paying tenant since 2019, and he's been trying to get them out. And then there was the moratorium on evictions because of COVID. So that person's been basically living rent-free. It's going to go on for a year before anything happens. So those are also the issues with New Hampshire. There's none of that. You know, I'm fortunate I've only had to deal with 1 eviction, but we were able to, it was a non-paying tenant. We went to court. It was not expensive to get them out, and 30 days they were out, and within 60 days we had a new tenant in.
Amy?
Okay, let's go on to another question. What kind of rent or cap rates can one expect for single family homes in New Hampshire?
Constance, you want to handle that one?
Well, I don't know the cap rates because I don't calculate for that for most of the single family homes because most of them are going to be owner occupied. But I would say that is going to vary greatly depending on what part of the state, because the rents do not vary as much as you would expect once you, I mean, compared to the cost of the houses. So I would imagine that some of the more rural areas, there's so little vacancy and people are willing to drive to be able to be in the country, that if you want to get a better cap rate, you might want to look further out than Manchester or the cities. That's more specific real estate question as well. Like the Seacoast is going to have more expensive houses, but it also has more expensive rent. I know a person who bought a duplex over there, bought in December of 2018, and obviously this isn't a single family, but just got it reappraised and it's gone up $50,000 in equity, and the rent that was under market when he bought it, his first time renting it, I think of the 1 bedroom, it was $1,100 and he's now up to like $1,400, and so it's like gone like a lot of appreciation and cash flow increase for there. Mark, you have
Thank you.
single family, so you would know cap rates.
In general, your cap rates are going to be lower on a single family than a multifamily. We're looking for cap rates in the 7, 8 range for multifamilies. So you're looking at 6, maybe 7 with a single family, if you could buy it right. But you have to expect a lower cap rate with a single family for sure. Amy, do we have some other interesting questions to handle?
Yes. What is the mood towards Airbnb or short-term rentals in the State House with the governor?
Okay, excellent question. In general, the governor and the legislature wants to keep business open for Airbnb. The problem has been the pushback from towns, especially the leftist towns and the tourism towns. Portsmouth has really been a pain in the ass, and they were the first ones that started trying to shut down Airbnbs by passing new noise ordinances, parking requirements, that sort of thing. But because New Hampshire is a strong tourism state, it's important to have these available. The state does require, if you have an Airbnb or a short-term rental, to pay rooms and meals tax. And that's 9% of the nightly rent. But most people who are doing Airbnb are willing to pay for it. And I think it's a great opportunity if you're in the right area. Conway, North Conway, near the Lakes region, near the beach. These are all excellent opportunities for putting in a VRBO or Airbnb. And as long as you can find somebody local to go in and clean it and check on it from time to time, if you don't live here, I think it's a nice opportunity for you. But I'd say we're still better than a lot of other jurisdictions around the country, and we are open to it. We're going to go through a couple more slides real quickly, including this. Bear with me. Wrong one. Okay, we talked about property management already. Pros and cons of a property manager, I believe we talked about that already. The most important thing, by the way, if you're a landlord, the most important thing in all this is tenant screening. You gotta weed out the bad actors up front. Have good leases in place. Make sure they're vetted by a real estate attorney, and keep accurate accounting. You guys can read that yourselves. Okay. We at Porcupine Real Estate are fond of these areas right here. We kind of lean these mainly because there's so many multifamilies in Nashville, Manchester, and Concord. A lot of these homes were built 100 years ago. These cities are all along the Merrimack River, and they're old mill cities. And back in the early 1900s, they were building 3 and 4 unit buildings left and right. And it's just a great way to enter into the real estate investment business by being an owner-occupied buyer. You can get financing for as low as 3.5% down using FHA financing. Now, you can only do that if you don't own another property. If you're a first-time investor, you can buy one of these buildings with 3.5% down. It's a great entry. Dover, over the last 5 years, has been a great investment play, but their prices have really gone up. So I like neighboring Rochester and Somersworth for those. And there are a couple other towns around the state, but we like to focus on these 3 or 4 because it's where we know the most people to help for repairs, maintenance, property management, and finding good tenants. Okay, I know financing is a big question. We always want you to talk to a financing professional to get more details. Right before this slideshow started, I was on the phone with my lender, get an update because the requirements have changed. If you're FHA, owner-occupant, you can still do 3.5% down. You'll have PMI, which is private mortgage insurance, but it's a great way to use leverage on your behalf. And that's good for either single-family residence or multifamily up to 4 units. 5 units and above, all this goes out the window. If you're looking at a 5-unit or above, like Frank has and like I once had, you need commercial financing. It's not 30-year fixed. Usually they're only good for 20 years. They readjust every 5 years on interest rate. So that's a different discussion altogether. For our purposes here, we're going to look at owner-occupant, 2 to 4 units. Now, if you're not owner-occupant, then you can do conventional financing, and that's going to be 25% down, okay? So that's a much different calculus. That's a lot more money, obviously, but you know, if you save up some bucks, what you will have with 25% down is no PMI, no private mortgage insurance. You're going to have a lower monthly payment, so you're going to have a higher cash flow and that sort of thing. Amy suggested we let some of the panelists talk about why they chose those particular properties, those towns, because we talked about that. So Frank, can you give us an idea of your experience with Concord and also in Pennacook, which is a village of Concord?
Yes, so my first 2 properties were in Concord, and actually when I first started looking, Mark, I don't know if you remember, we were looking in Manchester at first, and I had looked at a couple of small properties there, put some offers, and then when we went up to Concord, they were actually redoing the main street at that time. So I got to see that. They were improving the main street, and I generally felt that the Concord and immediate surrounding area was more of the type of place that I wanted to live in when I moved there. So my thinking was to keep it local. I knew that if I was living in the surrounding area of Concord, Concord was only 10, 15 minutes away, so I could eventually self-manage the properties. But I did, just for my personal opinion, I live in New York City. It's very congested. It's crowded all the time. And I kind of had a similar vibe in Manchester. And I'm not 20 years old. I don't need to be going to all the local bars and clubs and stuff like that. So Concord is more like a large town than a small city that just happens to have the state house and government agencies there, which makes it larger. It appears larger than it really is, but all the properties stay rented. It has a high demand, and I generally just like the area.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share. Go ahead, Constance.
Why I bought in Manchester?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of covered it earlier. Like, it's convenient for working Porcupine real estate as a realtor. There are a number of charter schools here that my kids go to. When I first moved to Manchester, my kids were all homeschooled, and honestly, the community of homeschoolers, there were some places in the state that I'd rather live if I had continued homeschooling. There are places that I feel like there are better support than Manchester, but with the charter schools, my kids are super happy with their schools, and the return on investment, like, there's not many places that, like, I couldn't buy, I don't think I could have bought on the coast and had 2 of my units pay for a 4-bedroom apartment like I find here in Manchester.
Well, that's exactly right. The price point is in Manchester. It's about 10% less than Nashua, 10% less than Concord, 20% less than Dover or other parts of the seacoast. So the affordability factor is a good reason to choose Manchester, and especially with 98, 99% occupancy rates, it seems like it really wins. Okay, I'm going to share this screen again. We're going to take a quick look at how to analyze financials. Now, each person is going to use your own spreadsheet, your own analysis, things you're looking for. Some people are chasing ROI, some people are chasing long-term appreciation, others are cash flow. But I want to give you some definitions as we go through ROI, NOI, and cap rate. Okay. This is a very simple, oversimplified investment profile. I know it's kind of small, maybe hard for you to see, especially if you're on a small screen. But when you analyze a property, you want to look at, first of all, what all the rents are currently, and that's going to be your gross income. By the way, when we analyze multi-family properties, we generally look at annual numbers, not monthly. Even though you think about rent in a monthly number, when looking at the calculations and the analyses, you're going to use an annual figure. In this particular example, their annual income is $32,940 with 4 different units. These are old, this is an old listing, so it had relatively low rents, but also the price was lower at that time. Look at these property expenses. This is what you always have to include when you're doing your analysis. The mortgage payments, the water and sewer. The landlord always pays water and sewer. Heat. In this case, this building, the landlord pays heat. But in a lot of the buildings, you want the tenants to pay their own heat, and then your numbers are going to look better. Electricity. Usually the tenants will pay their own electricity, but sometimes there's what's called a house meter, which is lights for the front porch, the basement, the hallways, that the landlord is responsible for. The insurance, typically for a 3 or 4 unit building, you're looking at $1,500 to $1,800 a year for landlord insurance. You'll want your tenants to have their own renter's insurance, but you still have to have insurance on the building. And then property taxes typically are the largest single expense after your mortgage. And those are going to run in the $4,000 to $6,000 range in most of the properties that are priced $200,000 to $300,000. Okay. In this case, if you look at this spreadsheet, or at least this analysis, they're looking at expenses $20,000 as a pretty sizable ratio of the total income. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to look at a few definitions. I'm going to go to a different screen here just to give you an idea of some of the definitions. We're getting a little bit in the weeds, but bear with me and I think you'll find it enlightening. Here is a more in-depth spreadsheet for sophisticated investors. They want to, or people just who are detail-oriented. You want to know every single last potential expense, besides the ones we talked about, which are insurance and property taxes and water and sewer. Look at all these things. You could have property management, you have utilities, accounting and legal. You should really include that. Advertising, you know, right now with a high occupancy rate, you don't need to advertise, but when in a different market, you may need to put ads in the Facebook ads and that sort of thing. And then in this particular analysis, I know it may be hard to see, but they did a cash flow based on gross rents and gross expenses, including a vacancy factor. And then there's down here, you can see that they've also included a depreciation factor. So this is what we mentioned earlier for the benefit of taxes, has to do with getting a depreciation write-off. So even though in this case they were cash flowing $15,654 a year, they're on the books, they have an $18,000 depreciation. And after principal pay, you don't get a write-off for paying down your your equity or your principal on the mortgage. So they're showing $2,156 of taxable net income. So even though they're getting in their pocket $15,000, they're only writing off their tax or claiming on their taxes $2,000 a year. So this is one of the huge benefits of owning rental property is depreciation, especially if you're pretty good income bracket and you're in the 20 to 28% bracket. I mean, that depreciation is a huge savings against your federal income tax. One of the fees we talked about earlier is property management. If you're an out-of-state investor like Frank, or you're like me and just don't want to deal with tenants at all, we're happy to pay a property management company. Generally, their fees historically are in the 8 to 10% range. And that means 8% of the gross rents. So if one apartment is $1,000 a month, your property manager collects the rents, checks up on the place, they're going to charge you $80 a month, month after month, for renting that out. And often what they'll do is collect the rents and then send you a check either once a month or once a quarter for your net proceeds. Besides the 8%, they also charge you every time they fill the apartment. And when there's a turnover, they go in there and clean it, and they're going to charge you fees for cleaning it up, maybe painting it if needed, and they'll charge you typically half of a month's rent to fill it. And that's what they get reimbursed for: screening the tenants, doing background checks, doing credit checks. Okay, so it's not as simple as 8%. You'll put that in your numbers, but also it's probably better just put a fudge factor of maybe 10% because they charge you when they have to fill a vacant unit. And of course, if they have to evict somebody, then it's even more money. Somebody asked if rental income is taxed in New Hampshire. Yes, once you're over $50,000 a year in gross rents, you really should file a state tax return for that particular entity or that LLC. Again, this is kind of detailed, so you'll want to get with your tax accountant on that. And you guys can still see the screen share. There are a couple of definitions here. This highlighted in yellow, loan to value. When you get a loan, again, if it's FHA, it's only 3.5% down. That means a loan to value of 96.5%. But nowadays, for investor, non-owner-occupied investors, the banks are going to give you a loan to value of only 75%, which means you're putting 25% down. We had talked about NOI and ROI. ROI is return on investment. There are different ways of looking at that. But NOI, you can see in this next section, I'll highlight it in green here. NOI, or net operating income, is basically your gross rents less a vacancy factor, less expenses, is your net operating income. That basically is your rents after expenses. And we use that when calculating your cap rate. Your NOI divided into the purchase price is a cap rate. I know we went through that pretty fast, but we can drill down a little bit more if you want. I'm going to stop sharing now and see if we have any other questions that the group wants to get in. Amy, anything?
Yeah, so have the investors found properties mostly on the MLS?
Frank and I have found all our properties, all but one, through the MLS, because 95% of houses for sale and buildings for sale are going to be in the MLS. If you're looking at 5 units or more, if you're a serious investor, you can go to loopnet.com, and there's newenglandcommercialproperty.com, which is kind of like the MLS for commercial properties. Once in a while, you'll find something in Craigslist, but there are a lot of scammers there, and I don't really like that. And actually, my first property, my 7-unit in Milton, that came to me through a free stater who was desperate to get out of it and knew I was a real estate guy, and he didn't want to list it, and he was in a hurry to sell, kind of a fire sale. So once in a while, we will find things off market.
were both the MLS.
Go ahead, Constance.
Mine were both the MLS as well. Although I did make an offer on one that wasn't on the MLS because I was told by a property manager that the owners might sell, and then they decided to keep it.
Here's another idea for you. For first-time investors, you might want to join the local RIA group. RIA stands for Real Estate Investor Association. And there's a pretty active one in Manchester called the NHRIA, or New Hampshire Real Estate Investors Association. They have a Facebook page, and you have some active people in there who are doing wholesaling, meaning they're doing a lot of bird dogging and trying to find off-market deals, getting those under contract, and then flipping them or selling them off, wholesaling them to investors before they close. So that is a way to get off-market deals. I've been a member of the RIA for years, and frankly, I don't like it as well as using the MLS, but I encourage you guys to join. It's only $100 a year to join NHRIA, and then get on their Facebook page, and you start looking at just the conversations they have, some of the opportunities that come up, and you'll want your realtor to analyze those with you before jumping in, but it's a great way to get more familiar with the lingo and the values and who the players are in your market. And Doug down in Alabama, there's probably a RIA down there.
For a duplex, do you prefer renters or landlords pay the utilities?
Okay, we always want tenants to pay their own utilities. The best, sort of the hierarchy of things you're looking for when looking for a multifamily in New Hampshire is, number one, the best price. But after that, you want separate utilities, meaning the tenants are responsible for their own hot water, heat, and electricity. Unfortunately, some buildings have one boiler that services all the heat for all the units. And then the tenants they don't care, they're not paying the heat, so they open the windows in the middle of winter, and they don't care. So really you want them responsible for their own. It's the easiest way for you as an owner to account for the individual expenses. After separate utilities on the hierarchy, you definitely want off-street parking, because in the winter here, you have snow bans, you have odd, even parking on the streets, and when there's snow emergency, it can't park on the street at all in some of these cities like Manchester. So it's really beneficial for you to have off-street parking so you can attract and retain the best kind of tenant.
I just have one thing to add real quick about that. Also, for somebody like me who pays a property manager to manage my properties, one of the reasons why it's so important to have separate utilities is if you're paying the utilities, the property manager takes 8 to 10% of the gross rents. So they're taking money before you even pay the utilities. So you're getting kind of hammered twice with that, where my tenants pay their own bills, so my gross rents may seem lower than somebody who pays for the heat and electric in the building, but then the property manager is going to take that money off the top. So whenever I'm looking at buildings, that's after location, that's the second thing, is like Mark said, are the utilities being paid for by the tenants?
I've definitely seen places where the higher rents were sellers were trying to justify a higher price because they got higher rents either through the Section 8 program, including utilities, or with college students, like specifically in Keene, because the rents were so much higher, they were charging more for their building. So also pay attention to that. If the utilities are included, it does not mean that the higher rent actually affects the price of the building, or it shouldn't, even if they're trying to make it.
Right, I appreciate your input on that. If we want to wrap up, we might take one more question if Amy found a good one in the chat box, but I'll remind you, we're going to do this seminar again, and we're going to go into more detail the next time, sort of like 2.0. Today was a 20,000 foot overview of the market here and some of the pitfalls and some of the things to look for, but next time I'm happy to drill down a little bit more into and analyses, crunching the numbers. Look, maybe we'll analyze a couple of individual properties. I think that'd be helpful for you guys, but it's a lot to cover in just 1 hour. So Amy, is there anything in there you want to mention from the chat room?
Yeah, what are some of the better areas to buy seasonal or vacation rentals in?
For seasonal vacation rentals, you're near the beach or near the Lakes region. Lakes region is north of Concord up near Lake Winnipesaukee. There's also a secondary Lakes region around Sunapee. These three places not only have good summer rentals, but there are a lot of ski resorts in New Hampshire. So in order, I'd say North Conway, Hampton, Lakes region, and then Sunapee are all excellent regions for those. I know there was a question about Keene. I know that was our last question, but I think Doug had asked about Keene. Keene is a great town for college rentals. The prices right now are a little bit lower compared to these other cities we mentioned, but rents are still high. The problem with Keene is the property taxes are super high there. And it's a very liberal town. And most of our people are more liberty-minded and conservative. We don't like the liberal lefty laws there. So you're gonna have a little bit more trouble with evictions and authoritarianism locally. But that said, if the numbers work, go for it. I like Keene overall. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. This has been recorded, so Amy will share a link to that later on if you want to check it out. I think you guys can, if you're online, you can download the chat or some of those comments there. But really appreciate our guest panelists, Constance, Spencer of Porcupine Real Estate, Frank Alfadano, future New Hampshire resident, currently stuck in the Empire State. Really appreciate your input, you guys. It was super helpful. I wanted the panelists to hear, horror stories directly from you guys who have been experiencing. And so I really appreciate all you guys who attended and sharing your questions with us and your energy. And Amy, I'm pointing because that's on my screen. I don't know where you are and everybody else's screen. But Amy, thanks for herding cats today. And bye, everyone. Let's do it again. Come to the next seminar 2.2. And in the meantime, stay in touch. Porcupine Real Estate. Goodbye.
Thank you.